So welcome, everybody. My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm here from the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College in New York City. And I'm pleased to be here with my friend Olivia Guaraldo from the Hannah Arendt Center in Verona. This is part of the INSTAR exhibit here at Documenta 15. And the last installment of the INSTAR exhibit is opening today, opened earlier at 2 o'clock, and will reopen at 6:30 today, and I very much encourage you to see it. We had to close it during the talks because it's loud. It's got some jackhammering involved, and it's about attention and freedom and art, which we will be talking about today. Olivia, in addition to being the Hannah Arendt, director of the Hannah Arendt Center in Verona, is the author of a number of books, including Storylines in English, a book about narratives and how storytelling and narratives are important to politics. Our talk today, and I just want to say I want to thank Tanya Bruguera very much, and also Leila and Aminta here, who've been helping us for the last 3 days as we've had these talks on Hannah Arendt, art, freedom, evil, speech, truth, lies, etc. It's been a real pleasure to be here at Documenta. And today, for the final talk in this series, Tanya and I had thought we should really do a talk at one of the core themes of Hannah Arendt's work, which is freedom. When people, as the Hannah Arendt director in New York, I often get asked, like, well, who is Hannah Arendt? What is she about? And I used to always say, well, the key concept was freedom. Now I add, there's two key concepts. There's freedom and there's meaningfulness. What does it mean to live a meaningful life? And they go together, and we'll get there. But there's something very connected between freedom and art. They're both free. They're both generative. They're both about creation. And so, Olivia, start us off by telling us a little bit about freedom. What does Hannah Arendt mean by freedom? And then we'll get to freedom and art.
Yes, thank you, Roger, for this invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here in Castle at Documenta, coming from Italy, from Verona, University of Verona. So I'm very pleased to be here and to enjoy this place and the communal aspect of this space. And the communal aspect of this space takes me to answer to your question, what is freedom for Arendt? For Arendt, freedom is never an individual matter, which might sound quite strange for us moderns who are tend to think that freedom is something that has to do with an inner freedom, with a spiritual or a cognitive or even dimension of the will. I am free if I can do what I want, what I will. Well, for Arendt, is not exactly this. For Arendt, freedom is linked to what for her is the essential feature of the human being, the capacity to start something new, the capacity to give birth to that which did not exist before. So freedom for her is linked to this generative aspect of the human being. Every human being is able to start something new, but the thing is that we never start something new alone by ourselves. We always start something new with others. And she connects the idea of freedom with the ability to act, the fundamental human capacity of action. And action is free insofar as it starts something new. It, so to say, gives birth to something new in the world. And it's always a communal, a collective fact, so to say.
Yeah, I think that's great, and thank you. And just tie that in for a second with your work on storytelling, because if you're free and you act together in public with others, the whole point is you appear in a world, and then what? People tell stories about you, and that's what Arendt understands politics to be, or about the world to be, is about the stories we tell together.
Exactly, yes. The meaningfulness, what you were talking about before, what is meaningful in life is being able to give meaning to what you do, to what we do. And to give meaning to what we do is to be able to tell a story of what has happened, to tell a story of a who, of a person who has appeared in front of others. And this is the essential feature for her of politics. Think how strange it is that she connects politics with this fundamental ability to appear to others and to be seen and to be heard. And I always think, you know, Roger, I always think that she insists so much on this element of being recognized as we appear, being told a story about our actions. For me, it's so important in Arendt's thought, given the anonymity and superfluity of human beings during totalitarianism, the anonymity of deaths, the anonymity of lives. And this is why she insists so much when she starts theorizing after Second World War, 1958. This meaning, this is essential.
I'm really glad you brought up this question of totalitarianism, because this idea of freedom, which is so central to her, is also at the very core of what she understands human rights to be. So in the origins of totalitarianism, she says, look, human rights as rights meant very little to Jews and other people during totalitarianism. The one human right, she says, is the right to act and speak in public in ways that matter, to appear. And so because the right to life, she says, is not a human right. We're going to die. But the human right is the right to speak and act in ways that matter and have people tell stories about us.
Yeah, well, this is another very important and strong point that Arendt makes when she criticizes human rights, because she says the bare life, the right to a naked and bare life as human rights are, we have seen them in camps. She says the bare life of the human considered just as human is what was the human being in concentration camps. Because life, significant, meaningful life, is always a life in the company of others, where words have meanings and actions have an effect, and she says. And this is why she says the basic fundamental human right is a right to belong to a political community. What has been translated into the right to have rights, which means the right to be a citizen after all. So this is very, very important. Again, to go back to this possibility for every human being to matter, to count in the world.
That's really wonderful. Thank you, Olivia. And so one of the things, our talk was called Arendt, Freedom and Art, but there was another word we had included, which was courage. And so if freedom is the ability to act in ways that matter in the world and have people tell stories about us, Freedom is always thus a risk, because if we act in a way that matters, if we act in ways that people attend to, they're going to attend to us, which means they could kill us, or they could imprison us, or they could say, oh, that's right, and tell stories about justice for us. So talk to us a little bit about courage and how it relates to freedom in Hannah Arendt's work.
Well, in this essay that I really suggest, the essay is called What is Freedom? And it's included in this book, Between Past and Future, which is a very famous book by Hannah Arendt. It's a collection of essays. In this essay, she says, okay, freedom is one of the basic facts of politics. And she says, this is a truism, something that is true. We all know it's true, but what does it really mean? And there she goes on and includes courage. And she also says, courage is the basic political virtue. Why? Because courage means leaving the safe space of the private for the open space of the public. You appear to others and you don't know, you cannot control the effects of your appearance, of your acts in public. So it does require a good share of courage to step out of the private and go into the public. And this is why she considers courage one of the main political virtues, she says, because it's not a matter of protection, my own private space, my own safe space. It's a matter of going out and caring for the world, she says. And there I want to quote, let me quote this beautiful, in a footnote in her book On Revolution, which is 1963 book. Arendt, in a footnote, quotes Machiavelli, the famous Italian political thinker, who in a letter to his best friend said, you know that I love the Republic more than I love my soul. And this sentence, it's interesting because she comments what she says, this might sound like a Renaissance cliche, the city-states, the Republican virtues, but it's something more than that. And Machiavelli was the first to interpret the political as autonomous from the moral and the religious. And she reads this as an important and positive thing, because she says, if a person in the Renaissance said, I love the Republic more than my soul, means that the love for the world, for the common world, was greater than the love for his or her own salvation, which at the time was the most important dimension of how do you say, afterlife or whatever. And we could easily translate that in the present. Maybe we could say, I love the Republic more than my body, perhaps, you know, more than my personal health or personal fitness. This would be a transposition of that. But it's very interesting, this attention that Arendt puts on what is outside us, not what is inside us or in our private space, but what is outside in the common world, in the world we share, and that we have to take care for it or of it together.
This idea of courage and the centrality of courage, whereas, as you rightly said, for Arendt, she says, to act freely means to care more for the world than for myself. That's a very untimely idea to some degree, although then you look at Ukraine and you look at political actors, and that's what she means by politics in some sense, is to the public thing, the res publica, yeah, that which, to say, I am, you know, I'm a person, and as a human being, what makes me human is to care more for something public than for my private security and safety. That's such an extraordinary claim of hers. It seems so out of date, and yet it seems so timely. I don't know. I wonder how you understand that in the modern world.
I understand that it's exactly as you say. It's exactly as you say. And what she says, and maybe I just read this quotation where she talks about courage, because she says that courage is not temerity.
Temerity.
Okay. She says, courage is a big word. And I do not mean by courage the daring of adventure, which gladly risks life for the sake of being as thoroughly and intensively alive as one can be only in the face of danger of death. Temerity, so this sort of exaggerated courage, we could say, is no less concerned with life than is cowardice. No? So she says, again, personal engagement, I want to challenge life by going in the face of death. She says, that is not courage. Courage is something else. Courage, which we still believe to be indispensable for political action, does not gratify our individual sense of vitality, but is demanded of us by the very nature of the public realm. Because this world of ours, she says, existed before us, and it is meant to outlast our lives. It will last after us. So we cannot afford to give primary importance just to our own life, because our own life ends. So we come in a world that existed before us and that we will leave. So we have to be responsible in a way of this world before than being responsible for our own lives. And in this sense, it is not temerity that which took Ukrainian people to defend their own res publica, I think.
Right, so it's not temerity, it's concern for a public world, a world of freedom, a world where they matter.
Exactly.
A world where Ukraine matters and is.
A world where Ukraine matters and is. And it is interesting to see how, I don't want to be polemic here, maybe we don't have time, but it's interesting to see how, unfortunately, the word peace has been, I would say, misused. Maybe I don't, the right word in English doesn't come to me, but to be a pacifist and to put life before everything else, life before freedom, life before democracy, life before resistance against authoritarian power. This, to me, and I think also for Arendt, is not pacifism. This is, again, this idea that survival is more important than a meaningful life. And I think most...
Maybe it's pacifism, but not humanism.
Maybe it's not humanism.
Or
yes.
it is humanism. Or not, it's not humanism, right? Because humanism means putting the world above.
A meaningful life.
Yeah.
A meaningful life. So it is interesting to see how context changes, the meaning we give to words change, and also we in the West, how do you say, not feeling very much at ease again with courage,
Yeah.
with political virtues.
So let me now turn a little bit towards art, because both freedom, which is to act in ways that are new in the world, and courage, which is to put something new into the world, and the common world, which is to that which we came into and which will last after us after we leave, are connected all to art in Arendt's thinking. Because art is that which is created that, again, must be original in some sense, must be new, because otherwise people won't pay attention to it. And to attend to it, you come and you tell stories about it, and it lasts. Artworks last. That's part of the this will be part of the archive of Documenta 15.
Yeah.
So how does art fit in with this idea of freedom for Hannah Arendt?
Well, she has very interesting things to say about art, and she distinguishes art as making objects, making works of art, and the performing arts, where is the process that counts. Performing arts like music, theater, singing, dancing, etc. But I think, she says that performing arts are like politics, because they need an audience, and they all consist in the process. They don't produce anything afterwards. They are here and now, the performing arts. Whereas the object of art, she says, is something that is the end product of a creative process and exists independently of its author, whereas the performing arts do not exist independently of who performs them. So I think this is maybe an old definition that could be overcome now that many works of art, also art in this sense, are based on performance. But the important thing, I think, is that art is an imaginative and creative process, no matter whether it's performing art or the other. It's an imaginative and creative process that I think now, in this time, in these times, is indispensable discourse that can supply, that can integrate the theoretical, the intellectual discourse. Because I think that in our field of the humanities, the philosophy, theory, social sciences, there has been an excess of critique, an excess of critical attitude, which is always or mostly a deconstructive attitude, a denaturalizing attitude. And in criticizing and just criticizing, we have become sort of imaginatively dumb to some extent. We are unable, we as intellectuals, I mean, not the artists, we are sort of unable to imagine something else besides criticizing, you know, the West and capitalism and neoliberalism and all of that. So we have been excessively critical and have lost an imaginative, creative dimension. And this is where art comes in. And this is where examples like Documenta or last year's Venice Architecture Biennale, which asked the fundamental question on how will we live together, ask a political question. And it's interesting that it is art that interrogates these questions and not theory or philosophy.
I love that. And, you know, one of my favorite things of Arendt, where she always talks about this thing called a revolutionary moment. And she says the revolutionary moment exists when the system, the current system, the authorities of the system have fallen away. And we all know that the institutions of our political and cultural lives are hollow. And we're clearly in a revolutionary moment. And yet she says revolutionary moments don't have to lead to revolutions. They can lead to counter-revolution. They can lead to stasis. They can last for centuries. And what you need for a revolution to happen is a new idea but it's not just a new idea that a few people think, but it has to be one that is attractive and compelling and can become a story for at least close to a majority of people so that a new world can emerge. And that requires thought, that requires analysis, and that requires the freedom to try, fail, and put new ideas into the world. And that's why we need the kind of freedom of art and artistic freedom to do that.
Yeah, and especially in these moments, I agree with you. These are potentially revolutionary moments insofar as the institutions are deep, hollow, as you say. But for Arendt, the revolution is not complete until you found something new.
Freedom. You found freedom.
You institute free institutions. So this is the huge question. Like she loved the founding fathers, Americas, because they were able to write a constitution after the revolution. So the constitutive moment for her is very important. So my question would be, are we able to imagine new institutions or to reimagine our institutions? Because this, for me, is an essential question. And especially that institutions, as she says, are like the performing arts, she says. They need to be enacted and reenacted and reenacted. They don't live if the people inside those institutions don't make them alive.
Yeah. And the institutions have to be public institutions. I mean, I think A friend, Yuval Levin in the United States, has made this argument that I think is so important today, which is that institutions are supposed to be public institutions that form the people in them, normalize the people in them into being public citizens, public figures. Whereas today, whether it's universities or newspapers or journalists or art world, people use institutions to elevate themselves as individuals, as a platform, and not as a culturalized world for creating common norms. And I think the loss of that public idea of institutions is one of the core challenges facing us today, and how to reinvigorate public institutions in that way.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in the INSTAR page, which is, I invite you all to go and see, when INSTAR presents itself, what struck me was this two words. INSTAR wants to promote civic literacy. So this idea of a literacy, we are all, I think today, even in the Western world, maybe in Cuba less than here, we're all politically and civically illiterate. We don't know the language of politics anymore. Not the language of the parties or elections. I'm not talking about that. The language of the public space, the language of the civic interaction, the political participation. And I was very happy to read that in INSTAR they work for civic literacy. Because, look, for example, we have elections in Italy on Sunday. It's a very important moment. But most of the people say in Italy, they're all the same. They're all the same. I don't care. I'm not going to vote. So a lot of people will not go to vote. And this is really sad. Because, as you say, politics has ended up coinciding with either a matter for journalists, for public opinion in a very restricted sense that only journalists care about, basically. And institutions have progressively, how do you say, decayed in some ways, in terms that it's just the single platform for a single individual, a single group, or single party. We don't feel that political institutions belong to us anymore. And think of a person who, like myself, my grandfather died as a partisan in Second World War, and he died, against fascism, for democracy. And to think that now young people will not go to vote, whereas somebody died for having that vote, is a very sad, sad story. So I think that a political literacy, a program of political literacy or civic literacy needs to be implemented somehow.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think Olivia and I, especially with a glass of wine in our hands, could sit here and talk all day. But I want to offer a chance for any of you to ask us questions, or make some comments or thoughts based on any of these questions, if there are any. So let me encourage you, if there are questions, comments, anything you want to hear about, words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Renata.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very important discussion to talk about the impact of politics on private lives and private lives on politics. And I think that maybe it's like that in Italy, but I would say that in Germany, it is much more direct. I mean, people do interfere. There are demonstrations, people get involved. It's because we have actually parties like the Green Party that try to change things, and they have foundations. That's also a very important tool, that a party has a foundation that has a goal. So it's kind of different. You have politics at one side, and with the foundation you have a cultural outreach, and you can really use two ways. I think that's really important, and I would not agree with you that it's everywhere like in Italy. Italy has been fucked up by the Berlusconi media. And we have here in Germany 22 public channels. And we have also European channels, Arte, French, German, and it's also published in 6 languages, Spanish and so on, I think Czech and then Dreisat, which will also, transfer all these, should I say, public events like documenta. They produce movies. There are interviews. You get really a variety of opinions, and there are also discussions, and there are also news channels with round table talks every night. So no, I do not agree with you, Olivia. There are countries, Germany gives a chance to people like here to do whatever it is. I may think it's in part nonsense or like a bit touristic and, kind of funny, and not doesn't really have an impact, I think, this documenta. But I think that there is this interactivity between politics and culture, very much so.
Thanks, Renata. Do you want to?
No, of course I agree with you, Renate, on this special situation in Italy. To some extent, we also have a lot of cultural events, cultural interaction between culture and politics. But it's true, as you say, that the media, the mainstream media has been, so to say, fucked up, not only by Berlusconi. Berlusconi played an important role. Commercial TV is now not just Berlusconi, but the sad thing, I think, is that political opinions have become a commodity in Italy. So it's really, you either have that channel which is more on your side, the other channel is less. But also, I think the state of journalism is very sad in Italy insofar as it is based on this sensational dimension of, gaining readers or seers or listeners based on how sensational is your news, and they're all political news, more or less, in this respect.
So I want to acknowledge what Renata said to some degree, which is, let's not be Pollyannish. Let's not say the sky is falling. And yet I'll push back a little bit. Politics for Arendt, and I think politics as Olivia and I are presenting it, is about a feeling of power. And I would say that the rise of protest culture is evidence of the depoliticization of our world. I don't think protests are about power. I think people protest often when they feel powerless. And so you have people like David Graeber and Jacques Rancière and others who have embraced what we call the new anarchism, that the only way to feel free is in protest, in setting yourself against the government, and setting yourself against the establishment, against the system. And I understand and I sympathize, to sense, with the new anarchism. And so David Graeber will say the only real freedom is in the freedom of setting yourself in a protest against. Because once you allow the state control, you've basically become a subject. But if you take that position, you never build the kind of free institutions. You never build a system of freedom, a place for freedom. You only allow yourself to exist on the outside. And I think what Arendt offers as a counter to the politics of protest is a demand that we actually seek to build institutional frameworks that allow freedom. And that requires decentralization, that requires the dislocation of power and the decentering of power, and yet the creation of power and not just resistance. And too much of, I think, the energy of people today is resistance and not building something new. And that requires what Olivia and I were talking about as revolution, as the building of a new institutions of freedom. And I think too many people, both on the left and the right, well, I'll talk from the United States. So, for example, the Tea Party movement and the Trump movement in the United States has actually sought to build institutional power in local governments, in states, and in communities, and in towns, halls, and town governments. Whereas the left has set itself up as a politics of protest. And I think that it helps explain why the right is being more powerful than the left, because the right is actually engaging in the political act of building a space for freedom, as they understand it, in political governance, whereas the left is embracing protest and anarchism. And I think that's a huge mistake as a political move. Are there other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Just a thought on that point that was made before. I think I'm a little less optimistic on the prospects of German democratic dialogue. I think we've been incredibly lucky with the impact that we didn't feel from the great financial crisis in 2008 and 9. And I think if we had felt that more, we would be at a stage where Italy and Spain and other dialogues see themselves now. That just as a thought. And I think I would wait where this winter takes us. But to come to my question, so Arendt says that, you know, it is important to imagine those futures, and I think that's a great point also that you two tap into. And I want to ask, how do we create these rooms for that dialogue? Where can we create that? Where can we have that? And how can politics and the institutions and parliaments assist that process?
You want to go?
Can I just answer to your question with an example? Because what I think Arendt is telling us between the lines, at least this is my reading, she's telling us we have been sort of performed as modern subjects only to look at the individual, or so the individual as the measure of the human. But this also implies another type of reasoning. The political is the protection of the individual. Politics in modernity has come to be the protection of the individual. So necessarily the political government rule is a matter of security. It's a matter of defending the individual from power, from others. So politics becomes just a matter of command and obedience, or just a problem of order. I don't know if you follow my reasoning. If we make a step aside and try to think of politics as the experience of acting together in a public space and creating institutions and make them alive, then what does it mean? It means that power is not something that dominates me or controls me. Power is something that I have in my hands, that I can share with others to build, to do something new. So the perspective is different. Said this, just a quick example. In the city where I come from, Verona, we just had local elections for the mayor. And Verona has been traditionally I mean for probably since Second World War, a center-right city, quite rich, quite very much Catholic, very much traditionally Catholic, conservative. This year, the candidate for the city hall, for the mayor, was a young for Italian standards, former football player who put together a team of people that were all young people. He never went to television, never considered interviews on the newspapers, never put the placards on the streets. He just walked through the city with the people that were his followers, but the followers were included in this project not to ask them a vote. They were included to say, do you want to participate in this new adventure, in this new challenge? We try to get Verona a center-left town instead of a center-right. So the engagement was on participation rather than on asking the vote. And this is a very interesting way of doing politics. Not, of course, you then end up putting your vote in the ballot, but the engagement that there is before the election is different. So it is as if all the participants to this new adventure were turned out to be the voters then afterwards. But this is a local, as Roger was saying, decentralized town government. And I think in the old idea of Thomas Jefferson, that was an Arendt, one of Arendt's favorite authors of the American Revolution, it's the local level, it's the institutive local participatory level that has to be enhanced, because the central representative level doesn't work anymore, or it can work, it can be depotentiated somehow and made work differently.
Thank you, Olivia. I just want to pick up on one, Olivia told a great story about local government, which I think is key. I'm going to pick up on the one thing you talked about is how can we get this kind of talk going? I think one of the things that's been frustrating for some people here at Documenta is there's been some controversy. How do you talk about it? How do you have these conversations without getting the media to blow up and et cetera? So next week in Germany is happening another meeting of the G1000 in Belgium and also in Germany, which is a group that is using sortition, or randomly selected citizens by lottery, who are brought together to come and discuss events in a deliberative fashion. They can bring in experts. I don't know how many of you saw about the French Climate Assembly last year, where they had 150 people randomly selected, plumbers, homeless people, local people, come in and for a couple of months meet regularly and talk about climate change and meet with experts and talk to each other. And they came out with extraordinarily interesting proposals. Whether their proposals are the right ones or not is irrelevant. There is no right proposal. But the point is, they came up with proposals that were based on deliberation amidst people who really disagreed, who came from all walks of life. That's what town hall meetings used to be. People who disagreed, plumbers, lawyers, doctors, street cleaners came together, farmers, and talked and figured out, do we need more teachers or more doctors or more or fewer taxes? And you had deliberation. And our politics now is one of voting every 2 or 4 years, and most people sit it out. It's really an aristocracy, and people forget that democracy, as it was practiced by the Athenians and also by the Italians in Rome and Florence, most of the people who governed were chosen not by election, but by lottery. Democracy was always understood as selection by lottery, not by voting, because people knew that if you voted for people, the people you elected would always be the most successful, the richer, the more established, the ones with good reputations. And it's not bad to have them in government, but they always are going to represent a small sliver of your society. And so I think one of the most interesting political movements around the world, and one that the Arendt Center has become, we now run the major training for running citizens' assemblies through sortition in the United States in conjunction with the G1000 in Belgium, is this idea of bringing citizen assemblies, in a sense, citizen juries. The idea is that if you have a jury, you select people. In the United States, it's 12 people. They hear a case, they deliberate, and they come up with a verdict. Alexis de Tocqueville, a French aristocrat who came to America in the 20s and 30s, basically said the most important institution in the American democracy was the jury. Why? Because in the jury, you had random, everyday people who came in and they had to act like judges. They had to think from the public perspective. They had to put aside their personal opinions and come to a verdict for what's right for the public. Well, what's in politics, citizen juries, or what we call citizen assemblies, do the same thing. It's you bring in randomly selected people and you ask them to elevate themselves, to act as citizens of a republic and make a judgment in deliberation with others that's the right decision for the republic, not for themselves. And I do think they make good decisions a lot, but they may not always. What's important to me is not that they make the right decision, it's that we train citizens. We train people in having these public conversations with people they disagree with. And that's why the Arendt Center, which we try and nurture political thinking, but we don't get involved in policy. We have become engaged with these citizen assemblies, and we are helping to run them because we think this may be the one way to save democracy today. And so I think it's an important question, and if you're interested, check out our work on citizen assemblies, but also the G1000 here in Europe, which is an amazing institution. Did you have a question over there? Yeah.
Maybe just an additional question on what you just talked about. You started with like having a program for political literacy. How could such a program look like?
Do you want to do that?
I'm not good at programs, but the example that Roger was making, I think, is excellent. And also, let me just add this, which is a very important Arendtian concept or idea that she uses in the book on revolution, exactly this book which exhorts, so to say, this idea of a local participation of politics as essentially consisting in discussing, deliberating together in assemblies, in local small assemblies. And she talks about the public happiness, which is very interesting that she gives this element of happiness to the life lived in public. And she says that when Thomas Jefferson put in the Declaration of Independence, the three main rights of the American people is liberty, freedom, property, and the pursuit of happiness. Sorry, not property, life, freedom, and pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Arendt takes this word and she says, why does he put the word happiness there instead of property, which was the three rights that John Locke had written in his second treatise of government? And she says, because Thomas Jefferson wanted that every future generation had the possibility to experience the public happiness that you receive when you participate in public affairs. And I think this is a very important sort of say nuance that we have to keep in mind, because politics has to do with happiness. It's not, we are used to interpret happiness as a private, as a private dimension, often coinciding with money, success, career, which are all fetish elements of happiness, and put them in the public, because there is some sort of, I say in an essay that I wrote, I claim that we as human beings, as zoon politikon, political animals, as Aristotle was saying, we still have a trace in ourselves of this happiness. When we experience it, we recognize it. We recognize a familiarity with a good feeling that comes from acting and deliberating together. So I think if we keep also this emotional aspect, this to politics, it becomes easier to imagine forms of participation, interaction, institutions. I know it might sound a little bit, philosophical or poetical, but I think it is important that in these times of rage, anger, hatred, that we start to forge also the positive, the generative words attached to politics. So then we can, in a communal effort to reimagine politics, we can maybe have an easier way.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just add, you know, I was said before about protest. There's something wonderful about protest. I mean, if you've ever been in a protest, and I assume most of us have here in this room, they're fun. There's a lot of fun in protest. I mean, sometimes people get too serious, and that's okay too. But protest should be fun. And one of the things Arendt said about the protests in the 60s and in 68 is at least people were having fun and engaging in the political world, having fun. Her critique of it was, though, that they were on the outside looking in. And she said, we have to make being on the inside fun. And that goes to these citizen assemblies that I was mentioning before. One of the things that I think most recommends them is that in France, they had 150 people in this citizen assembly, and 6 of them, all people who had never been involved, never voted before in their lives, all ran for office the next year because they got engaged, they had fun, they realized, and they now have reunions every couple months, these people who are in this citizen assembly, because they got engaged, they were having fun. And we have to make political life fun again. Protest is one way to do it, but actually having deliberation and not just party politics where you have to get elected on a party platform and then vote that platform, that's not fun. What's fun is getting in there and arguing and yelling a little bit. You know, the English backbenchers, they have fun. And I think we need to bring a little fun back into our politics. Yeah.
Hi, just to echo what you just say, I'm from Taiwan. We have very interesting democracy in Taiwan, which young people, we have only one public channel in Taiwan. And even young people, we don't actually trust the public channel either. We have 2 major parties, green, blue, but young people, they don't buy that. But we were forced to understand what's going on in the society because we have a very unique referendum system. When we vote for a president, sometimes we also have to vote for 10 other questions. Like, do you agree for a nuclear power, or do you agree for the homosexual marriage, something like that? So young people, we have to try to understand what's going on, just, so that we can vote. But we just created, like 3 years ago, we just created the highest rate for voting, especially for the young people. Why? How we achieve it? Because politics is quite fun in Taiwan. Because we have some, like even IT geek. They create something like hackathon. It's hackathon. It's a special term invented I think in 70s in United States. Like all this geek, they gather together. They create some source, like open source. They try to upgrade some existing system. And when it comes to Taiwan, we have so many the IT geeks. They try to involve to help to improve what we are not satisfied in. For example, just a simple example like a dictionary. We have so-called Chinese dictionary in Taiwan, which we cannot go further to other reference when you click on that word. So all this IT geek, you don't know where were they hiding. Actually, they are hiding from their desktop, and in 24 hours, they have already made a new dictionary online. And one of this geek in the center, it was a he, but now it's she, Audrey Chen. Now she's the first digital minister in Taiwan. And then now she become our minister. And that's a miracle, actually. She was hiding behind her computer. And what I'm saying that when we Taiwanese young people, we don't trust our government, we don't trust our media, we don't trust our journalists, nothing like that. So how can we understand such a complicated and difficult society which is happening? And plus, don't forget that we are under threat of mainland China, right? So how these young people still willing to understand and help to improve the society? I think there's something, it's fun because Audrey Chen, she keep on saying that we have a, if you go on the FB, we have a MEME system, MEME. That means everything. In Chinese, we said 梗图. I don't know how to say in English. Like if we have something very serious in the world happen, right away in like in one less than 1 day, there will be something very fun, like caricature, like a comic like thing. Then people, they can echo on it and improve on it. And this is the spirit of hike, the hike song, because it's open source. Everybody can do something like that. Yeah, it's.
First of all, thank you. I actually will be in Taiwan in November giving a series of lectures, and I've been very interested in the work of Audrey Chen's. So I have Colin McGill, who actually wrote the software that I think they use in Taiwan for this system that Audrey Chen uses, is going to be speaking at the Arendt Center in October. So what you're talking about is exactly what a kind of thing I think we need, to use digital resources as a way of creating discourse and dialogue, and not just from the top down, but from the bottom up. And it's a dream that a lot of people have had, and it's been very hard to come by. But I think in Taiwan, as far as I know, it's the only government in the world, national government, that's actually begun to use these systems and try to experiment with them. And I think you're on the forefront of it. So I hope to, if you're going to be in Taiwan, I should meet you, and maybe when I'm there. No, I think this is fascinating stuff, and I hope we can do it. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you for the example here with Taiwan, and it reminded me of something that has a close connection to documenta, because one of the founding members of the Green Party was Joseph Beuys. And Joseph Beuys really worked for democracy on a grassroots level. And you can see it all over Kassel, looking at the trees and with the stone next to it. And so he is part of that movement that comes from outside of parliament. And now the Greens succeeded to be part of the government. So it's a long process, and you have to form that movement, and in the end, you are in power. You just have a very long way. And so that's for the free Taiwan, maybe the long march to come to power and counter that system on mainland China, because we need that opposition from the democracy side.
Yeah, I mean, one of the really questions that this raises is to what extent democracy is compatible with party politics, right? I mean, when the United States was founded, they really didn't want there to be parties, the founders. They thought parties were a disaster. And because parties, to the extent that they require internal deliberation among the party members, but once the party decides, you have to come down and you have to vote with the party, it actually not only excludes deliberation outside the party structure, but it cuts 99% of the population out of deliberation. And that's one of the reasons I'm so attracted to these ideas of citizen assemblies. They get around parties, they get around platforms, and they say, let's bring everyday people in, let's talk to party members, let's talk to experts, and let's see if we can deliberate in a way that's exciting and fun. So, I mean, I think you're right. At times you do need to build parties, but I think you also need a way around the parties. I think you need both. Maybe that's how I would want to put it. Because Hannah Arendt was very suspicious of parties. I mean, she believed strongly in having interests and pursuing your interests, but you don't want to solidify your interests, right? I mean, what do you think?
No, what she said about Taiwan and what you said made me think of the problem of parties is that sometimes they can be also functional to authoritarian governments. And just to follow up on what you were saying, I'm reading this book by Masha Gessen, who is this very interesting Russian writer and
A Bard colleague,
she's
and
a
she spoke here
Bard.
2 weeks ago.
And what struck me when she describes Russia after Glasnost, Perestroika, and the arrival of Putin, well, the main thing is that the fear of power, the fear or what power in the name of Putin and his party, what they feared the most and what they tried to contrast the most was self-organization from the civil society. Self-organization, which is something different from protest, you know? It's this idea of self-organizing, this sort of basic idea of democracy as self-government, basically, which authoritarian regimes are afraid of, I think.
So we're right at the hour when we should end. I did see there was a comment on Facebook that I think resisted something we said, and at least we should acknowledge it and maybe respond briefly to it. And it says, it's from Noelle Vercruce. And she says, to me, the right to live is the most fundamental human right. A human being can only appear, being seen and heard, and act if the human being is alive. Guaranteeing the right to life was for me also a guiding principle of all restricting COVID measures. So I'll say this and then I'll let you respond. I don't think you need to be alive to appear in public. I mean, if anything, one of the most disastrous of the restrictive COVID measures was the ban on funerals. The whole point of so much of religious ritual is to remember and to have appear those who are no longer with us in public, in a public ceremony. The disaster of so much of the COVID restrictive measures was that, and one of Olivia's Italian compatriots, Giorgio Agamben, saw this faster and more quickly than almost anyone else. And I think he made a mistake at the beginning in denying the severity of COVID, but I think he ended up being right and very Arendtian in his plea to not let COVID turn us away from the importance of public memory and public gathering and public events. I think that the overemphasis on life is deeply anti-political and is not and is actually counter to human rights as the right to be meaningful and to live a meaningful life. So I'll leave it there, and maybe Olivia will agree or disagree with me. I have no idea where she's going to come down on this.
I'm not making any comments on Agamben. I'll just say that not a word has been said on loving the Republic more than your life in terms of Ukraine. He hasn't, well, I'm not talking about it, but anyway, because that was the time of saying, okay, bare life is something, but when you put your life at risk to save a meaningful life, a meaningful community, that is what Arendt meant. And he never said a word about Ukraine, but said many words on COVID and absurd things, comparing the university professors who agreed to have the green pass to teach. He compared us to the university professors that signed the fascist manifesto. So, well, anyway. I think it's a complicated issue, the question that was asked by the person on Facebook, but I think that also in the COVID restrictions, there was a care for the common world. There wasn't just a restriction based on just the bare life. It was a common suspension of human relationality in order to favor the coming back of human relationality once again. So it was, I think it was also a political, depending on how you look at it, it wasn't just a suspension of individual freedom, it was just a collective effort to save more lives so that the community could still be alive again. And I agree with you on the ban on funerals. That was really terrible. And in Italy, we suffered a lot of that, you know, corpses taken away with trucks, basically. So it has been serious. Yes.
Okay, well, first of all, please join me in thanking Olivia Guaraldo for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger.
And I want to again thank Tanya Bruguera and INSTAR for hosting these 3 talks that we've had the last 3 days. Tanya, thank you very much. And I'll just remind you that in half an hour at 6:30, the new INSTAR exhibit, Disavowing Chance, the last INSTAR exhibit of this documenta, will open right in this room. Earlier today, the line was all the way down there, so get online early if you want to see it. And I hope you get a chance to. Thank you all very much. And I hope you get to read some Hannah Arendt. Thanks very much.